Hello, everybody. Welcome to my show, What's Your Story in the New Normal? My name is Lita Abella. I'm an entrepreneur, public speaker, health and wellness consultant, licensed private investigator, and former LAPD lieutenant. And in between all that, I went to law school and obtained my JD. I tell stories that inform, inspire, and influence others. Today, I have a very special guest, someone who I've known for several years now, who I actually met while I was working at the State Bar of California. And the person I have today is Lyle Moran, and he's a journalist. So this is going to be so interesting because it's like turning the tables on him. He's usually the one that's interviewing everybody, so I get to interview him. So first, Lyle, welcome to the show. I'd like to first have the audience get to know a little bit about yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about your personal life?
Sure. And first off, thanks so much for having me. I am looking forward to being on the receiving end of questions. It's a nice change of pace. But I'm a Bostonian, grew up on the East Coast, big sports guy growing up, very into tennis. That's kind of my major sport, but played like soccer, baseball, that. But I studied journalism at Boston University. And after college, I worked for a few years back covering politics and the like on the East Coast. But I have an older sister who was very wise, and her and a couple of girlfriends came out to San Diego after they graduated from college. And so my family all started moving to the West Coast, primarily in San Diego, some up in San Francisco. My dad's now in Orange County. But basically, my family all fled winter. And so finally, a few years back, it was time for me to come out here. So my sister, it's nice, her and her family just live a couple minutes away. My mom was here. She's now moved up to Oregon. But anyways, yeah, so I'm single, but have family around, friends involved with the church in San Diego, and very much like to stay pretty active. So play tennis, run, hike, and try and, do as much as I can these days, even with our, COVID-19 restrictions.
Wow. Well, that's usually what happens when people come to California, especially from back east. I mean, once you get all that beautiful weather, the sunshine, 80 degrees every day, the palm trees, the ocean, we have everything here. So everybody comes to California. I'm probably one of the rare natives who's been born and raised here in Los Angeles and have lived here my entire life. But usually people I meet, they've all are transplants from somewhere else. So welcome to my
Thanks.
state.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here and feel like a West Coaster after a few years now.
Yes, yes. So I want to get to know a little bit about your journey as a journalist. So first, how long have you been a journalist?
So it's been, professionally about a decade now.
Wow. And how did you get your start, your career in journalism? What drove you to that?
Yeah, you know what? Growing up, we used to get the Boston Globe newspaper at my house. And so I would go out in the cold each morning and bring it in and always go to the sports page. My mom's a big sports fan as well. So, I'd look at the sports statistic, read those stories. So I always enjoyed just that aspect of finding out what's new and reading different opinions as well. And so for a while, I thought I was going to become a sports writer. And I pursued that route for the first little bit in college. And then I did a program at the State House in Boston my junior year of college where I covered state politics basically 4 or 5 days a week and grew to really enjoy that. And I just liked, always getting to kind of interview people in power and really the investigative aspect, just trying to find out things that government officials didn't necessarily want you to know and bring those things to light. So they could inform, either the action of lawmakers or other policymakers. So I think I've just really always found that aspect intriguing and fun. And so I've tried to, wherever I've been, still do some investigative reporting.
Wow, that's very interesting. So what qualifications does one need to actually become a journalist and do what you do?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of reporters did study journalism in college, but many studied other topics as well. I mean, I think, a big thing is just a curiosity and willingness to ask questions is an important trait. obviously, training, doing that helps. I wrote for my college newspaper and did some like summer internships. So that type of thing was helpful. I was just actually, it's funny, I was recounting with my mom the other day how with one of my summer internships, I had to, write a profile on a meter maid and what she did every day, so you, and then there was another time I had to write about like a baby store opening in this town. So I think it helps to have experience writing about a lot of different things. But then it's like, once you learn about them, it's, just asking the tough questions. And I think it also, just getting experience and feedback from those who've been in the field longer. That's been helpful as well. Just, editors who look at your work. So yeah, those are a few different things, but I know people take many different routes. I maybe took a more traditional route going to journalism school. But writing experience in general helps. And then you kind of learn the craft as you practice it.
And being a journalist, I mean, there's so many topics that you can cover. You mentioned that in the beginning, you thought you would be a sports writer because it sounds like you're totally into sports. You love all different types of sports. And so when you follow your passion, it's something like, wow, I get paid to do this. This is what I totally enjoy. But then you took a transition and you pivoted into politics. So, and then how we met was you were a journalist for the Daily Journal, covering a lot of the stories at the state bar, and I was the president of the Employees Union Association. And at times, when we had a lot going on at that time when I was president, and I would give you press releases on what the union was doing. So how did you pivot to the legal area, and especially, the covering issues with the state bar and so forth? What drew you to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yeah, a lot of people ask, like, how did you get to legal? Because it is very specialized. But, to be honest, I had written about some legal issues and lawsuits when I was back on the East Coast, just because, as you know, like the law, overlaps with so many different areas. So I was writing about like local government and local crime and even some, issues involving the Buddhist community back east, where my newspaper was. There were some lawsuits between different members of the Buddhist community. So I had some experience writing about the law. But when I moved to San Diego, I mean, as I shared, I moved here more for family. And so I came here without a job. And the first offer I got was to cover legal news in San Diego. And so I was asked, could I cover the law? And as a journalist, you're often asked to cover things you might not be an expert in, and then you learn. And so I said yes. And so I started off here writing more about San Diego issues. And I did, while doing that, write about a little bit about the state bar here and there, but not as closely. And then I went to the Los Angeles Daily Journal, as you mentioned, and the beats they wanted me to cover were the State Bar of California and then law schools. And there's a lot of intersection between those two. And so little did I know there would be so much to write about with the State Bar. And it's funny because one of my sources would always say to me, "You never thought it would be this fun to cover the State Bar, did you?" And I go, "No, I didn't know there would be that much going on." And even, as you noted, I would go cover those meetings in LA, and there would be employees like protesting outside and with signs, and it was intense. And so it was nice, even though I was based in San Diego, I always thought it was meaningful and helpful to go to LA or San Francisco for the meetings, because it seemed like for a while there was always the employees coming to speak and, stick up for themselves. And so, I felt like it was important as a reporter on those issues to give the employees a voice, as well as the state bar leadership. But I respected the courage it took for employees to speak up about issues in front of management. I know that's not easy. So yeah, it wasn't a planned transition to legal, but it seems to have gone pretty well.
Wow. And yeah, I just assumed when I first met you that you probably had a law degree, maybe you were an attorney, because you had so much knowledge about what was going on at the state bar, and just a lot of legal issues. And I remember reading your articles because, you know, we would get a copy of the Daily Journal and I would read the articles. I was like, oh my God, this is happening here. We would actually look for your newspaper to find out what was going on at the state bar because you knew a lot more than we did. And luckily things have changed now. We have executive directors now and more managers who are more transparent in the daily going-ons with the board of trustees, with management, leadership, and so forth. It's gotten a lot better. And really, I think it's due to the fact that we always were asking what's going on, why is it that we were getting all our information from a newspaper instead of getting it from our own people. And so I think it helped open the doors of communication between staff, management, employees, and so forth. And I truly believe communications has improved tremendously because of that.
Well, that's great to hear.
One of the things I think most people, at least I'm seeing this when it comes to getting news, people nowadays get their news from everywhere. Back in the day, it used to be you'd open up the newspaper and, you know, read the newspaper, but now it's like basically everyone gets their news on their phone. And where on their phone, from Facebook to Instagram to all these different social media platforms. A lot of the information, it appears that people will read something and think this is gospel. This, if it's on the internet, it's true. As a reporter, there are certain steps that you have to take to fact check and make sure everything that you're reporting on is accurate and true information. Can you tell me about the steps that you go through as a journalist to make sure what you are reporting is actually accurate, true information?
Yeah, and I know it's, as you say, it's kind of harder than ever right now with so much, you know, flying around Facebook and Twitter and a lot of, you know, conspiracy theories out there that people, they don't do the fact checking and then they believe in, you know, especially during this time of COVID-19, you know, you have people kind of peddling conspiracies regarding, you know, different prescription drugs and things like that. So it really is important people do their homework. You know, the nice thing where I am now as a reporter at the ABA Journal, we have, you know, pretty thorough fact checking process and copy editors that do their own fact checking of our stories as well. So that's helpful. You know, I always go back and look at primary sources. So, you know, say I am writing a story about, you know, I did one recently about the Washington State Bar, and there were a lot of, you know, outside investigative reports being referred to or lawsuits. And so, you know, having those primary documents handy and then referring to them, that's always very helpful. You know, what's nice now is LinkedIn. You know, I want to make sure I get an employee's title correct and their background. And so, you know, of course, you ask directly of those you interview, but it's also nice where LinkedIn kind of is another layer of just checking, you know, where they've been and their different titles and the like. So there's a lot of, I guess, public resources out there that weren't always there in the past. And then even, you know, if you record interviews, you can, when you're going through the quotes, you just go back and listen to that section to make sure you transcribe the quote correctly. So that's important. And turning to, you know, trusted sources, like sometimes, you know, we'll refer to other journalists' work in our reporting. And so I had a piece come out about sports law yesterday, and I referred to, you know, a report in USA Today, and that's, you know, a reputable source with a reputable reporter who had written the story. And so, you know, I felt comfortable linking to that source so people could see where I got the information.
Wow. It's great to hear how, you know, journalists with skills and expertise such as yourself go through those steps to make sure whatever they're reporting on, it's not, oh, well, so-and-so just told me this and that must be true, so I'm just going to publish it. There's steps in a process that you have to take to make sure whatever so-and-so told you is in fact true. Or maybe there's a document, like you mentioned, that you can actually obtain to do some research. And speaking of documents, so what methods does a journalist go through to get documents to fact check?
Yeah, so a big thing is public records requests, and it's, interesting because as you were sharing about, the increased transparency at the State Bar of California, I know something that was very helpful to me in my reporting about that agency early on was it had just become subject to the Public Records Act in California prior to me coming on board, and so I know I used that a lot to get the information about, spending on outside legal counsel and just things along those lines. So yeah, public records laws, they vary by state. And of course, you have the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level for federal agencies, but those are very important. And also, another way to get the documents is just to reach out, I guess not in a formal records request, but ask the PR people for at different public agencies or companies for records you're seeking. They may, if it's a public agency, they may say, well, you've got to request that in a public records request. But also, I think it's important as reporters to establish sources who, will give you documents they're maybe not supposed to. So, but they trust that you won't link it back to them, and they think it should be out there for the public good or, for other purposes. But I think the key with those is making sure the documents are legitimate. And so, but yeah, there's a variety of ways to try and get them because, unfortunately, sometimes the public records process just takes a long time and can be delayed. And, by the time you might get something, the news is, passed you by. So you do need to connect with people internally to get those records. And I know, the story I'm sure you remember when I wrote about some of these complaints about non-lawyers practicing law that were sent to the state bar and just being shoved in a drawer. And so, I was able to get some of those records, unofficially, and was able to then get them confirmed, the information in them confirmed by the bar.
Yes. I think you froze a little bit. Okay, I think you're back. There you are.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I don't know where I cut out, but I was just saying you have to try a few different avenues sometimes.
Right. That's very good information. And as far as a journalist goes, because, people can just walk up to a situation and say, oh, I'm John Doe or Jane Doe from 123 channel, channel so-and-so. Journalists are supposed to have ID, correct? And how does one go about getting the appropriate credentials to make sure that when they do go into a scene, I'm thinking crime scene because I'm thinking of my law enforcement background, but a crime scene or going into let's say a board of trustee meeting, how do we know you're just not somebody from off the street? What does a journalist need to do to get credentialed?
Yes, that's a good question as well. And I know it can sometimes differ. I mean, I know for attending public agency meetings or government meetings, those are typically open to the public. So you wouldn't have to, say in advance, I'm coming. But sometimes that could be helpful if you're going into, a building you're not familiar with or starting out covering an agency and want to let them know you're there. I know in San Diego, the police department provides press passes for, legitimate journalists. If you provide like an application to them, you can get a press pass. And, it has to be official, and you've got to get a news organization to, the higher ups to basically say, yes, you work for them, you're legitimate. And to be frank with you, with my current role, I haven't done that since I don't really cover local news so much anymore. Like I am not going out on the crime scene, but I know, business cards are important to have, your ID, and especially if you're going to be a reporter that's going out to fires and shootings and the like, then you would want a more official pass so that, when you arrive, law enforcement, I mean, even when you're pressed, sometimes there are often limits on where you can go at a scene, but at least they know you're legitimate. So yeah, the more you have, the better. And it's, the other thing that's important is if say you're going to do like man on the street interviews or things like that, it's just important to identify yourself early on. So who you're speaking to, they know, that you're a reporter and, that you're taking notes or the like. So that's always key as well. And sometimes they may just say, oh, I don't want to talk. Or they may say, well, how do I know who you are? And if they don't want to trust you, and nothing you can do about that. It certainly happens. I always tell myself when I did more in those kind of man on the street type interviews early on in my career that the worst they can say is no, and then you find someone else that wants to talk.
Right, right. So your role as a journalist is very similar to my role as a private investigator, where I have to go out and interview somebody, let's say on an accident that occurred, and you have a witness who is that one witness who can really either prove that the accident occurred this way or it didn't occur that way. And you have those people sometimes who just don't want to get involved, they don't want to give a statement. What techniques do you have to try to get information from people? I mean, as a police officer, there's almost that command presence and they're kind of scared. So, as a police officer, that's one way. As a licensed private investigator, it's not as intimidating, but depending on your demeanor. But now as a reporter, how do you try to get the answers or the information from that one witness that just doesn't want to talk?
Yeah, it's not easy. I think, just trying to convey the reason why you're seeking their information and what you think could be accomplished by publishing the story and getting the information out there. I think that's important. And just showing, as well that you're trustworthy and that, you're not there to exploit what they have to say, but rather you want to give the public the fullest picture of what's happened in a given circumstance. So I think you're right. It takes some cajoling and encouraging, and sometimes it takes patience. Someone might early on just kind of want to talk to you off the record or on background, and then maybe as they grow comfortable with you, down the line, they would be, confident, speaking with you. And I think I've seen that as well. Sometimes when I start writing about a new subject, people who are well versed in that topic, they might want to see a few of your articles on that subject first before deciding whether to engage. And I understand that. So I think if you show to them, or show even to colleagues of theirs that you're trustworthy and reliable, that can help too. So I know sometimes, and I'm sure maybe you've utilized this in your own lines of work, but if you have someone that can vouch for you to someone else, like say, hey, you know what, you should talk with them. That's always been helpful to me.
Yes, yes. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about being trustworthy. You're not there to exploit the person, giving them the honest reason why you're there. You want to hear this person's side of the story, or there's every story has two sides, and then there's the middle of what probably really happened. But establishing relationships, I think another one that you mentioned is extremely important. Once people start to feel comfortable with you, know that you're not going to take anything out of context and you're going to report and say exactly what that person said. They start to trust you, and so later on down the road, you might happen to have another story where that person might have some valuable information, and now they want to give more information to you because they find out, yes, this is a respectable individual who authentically reports and doesn't, have his own hook in it as to how he or she wants the story to play out. So yes, I think that's very, very valuable information.
And
So
Lita, another thing that just before I forget comes to mind on that topic is, sometimes too, you have someone who said one thing or has one perspective on an incident or an event, and you want to get another perspective. And so sometimes I know saying like, well, we have someone already saying this with this viewpoint, like, and this, you may know that the other person has a different viewpoint, but they're reluctant to share. And I sometimes expressing, well, if you don't you know say it for the record, that viewpoint might not get expressed. I know sometimes that helps too, just because you're making clear to them, like, I want a full picture here. And so, if they don't say anything, they can't come back at you after and say, well, why didn't you, get this perspective in there? Because you tried.
Right, exactly. Good point. Yes. So we're just about out of time. So do you have any final words of wisdom if somebody were interested in becoming a journalist, and um, maybe some words of wisdom that you can give someone who might want to do this as a career, or maybe this could be their second career. Maybe if they've already done 20 years in another field, and this might be something that they want to do.
Yeah, and I know it's if you watch the news, it's a tough time for journalists right now. And just, I mean, in a lot of industries, but I've been seeing lately how a lot of journalists, even at big companies like CBS News, have been losing their jobs. But it's certainly, there's never a dull moment, is one thing I always say. And so I think it's something, if you're wanting like each day to be different and to learn about topics you never thought you would learn about, it's an exciting field to go into. And I think it really, you just build your way up by actually getting that hands-on experience. I mean, my schooling at Boston University was very helpful, very appreciative of the professors there. And I should say, in terms of law school, I did go to journalist law school, which is just a few-day program that they put on at Loyola Law School in LA to help reporters do a better job covering the legal system. So that was my law school, and it was
Oh, I
very,
didn't know they have something like that.
yeah, no, it was great because they brought journalists from across the country together, and we engaged with judges and lawyers and the like. So it was very helpful. But yeah, I would just say, like, get experience, even if it means covering things that aren't your forte to start with. And as you prove your worth, you'll get more assignments and maybe get into the area you want to be, or like me, end up in an area you never thought you'd be, like legal, and they'll find it's interesting as well.
That's great information. Very valuable information. So thank you so much. So I want to thank my guest, Lyle Moran, for being a guest on my show and providing really informative and valuable information on being a journalist. And until then, remember to like and subscribe to the video and watch out for next week's episode. And until then, please make sure that you stay healthy, stay safe, and stay positive. Thank you.
Thanks.